Hi everyone, welcome to week 8 COS10030 Digital Technology in Indigenous Context lecture. Now this week we are going to study stakeholder analysis. Now why we actually going to study the stakeholder analysis, right? So before that I acknowledge for the country, Puranjali people, elders past and present where the Swinburne campuses are located. Right, so this is the content we are going to study this week in this lecture. What is the stakeholder analysis and why we conduct the stakeholder analysis in this unit, why it is also important and how it is done and what it looks like in practice, and stakeholder analysis adapt for the class project. So I will actually play one of the projects undertook by higher education students, and the project leader explains that how they have done that project later on. Okay, right, so stakeholder analysis is very crucial because it's a crucial evaluation process within the context of indigenous community projects that you are currently doing, right? Now you know that you are now not actually going into the field, but you are doing these projects inside the classrooms. But it's still you need to understand the dynamics and these processes behind the stakeholder analysis, right? Now the stakeholder analysis actually serves as a kind of a, I would say, a strategic tool to identify and engage with the key players or key stakeholders who possess or an influence or have a vested interest in your project, right? A community driven project, right? So this analysis is I would say a fundamental in kind of fostering a successful project outcome that align with the values, needs, aspirations of indigenous communities. Now, what is a stakeholder analysis is all about? Now, stakeholder analysis is a kind of evaluation approach we use to identify and understand various parties or individuals who can significantly impact or can be affected by an indigenous community project, right? The project you are undertaking, right? So it involves a kind of a systematic examination of these stakeholders to assess their needs, their interest, their level of influence into your projects, right? So by recognizing and engaging with these stakeholders, projects like your project can be more effectively tailored to meet their expectations and address the potential challenges. So then the next question that you will ask is why we conduct stakeholder analysis in this particular context, right? So stakeholder analysis kind of, as mentioned before, hold a kind of a particular importance, specifically in the indigenous community project context due to its unique cultural and social and also historical dimensions. So the conducting stakeholder analysis serves several critical purposes, right? So the first one is analyzing stakeholder needs, interest, and influence is very important because understanding the distinct needs, interest, and power dynamics of various stakeholders enables the project teams to create a kind of inclusive and culturally sensitive strategies for your project. Okay, so that's one of the key reason why we analyze the stakeholder, and also by identifying influential figures within the indigenous communities, for example, elders or community leaders or cultural custodians, probably allow the project to gain valuable support and guidance because these are the people who drives their community, who give their opinions, and their views and their teachings actually are well respected by their community. Um, so to get the valuable support from the projects, you need to actually find out key players and key influencers, right? And identify their influential power and how well they will going to support your project, right? So that's very important. And also, um, um, it will also help us to gain early agreement on goals and plans, right? By involving the stakeholders from the outset, also help to secure their buy-in and align the project objectives with the community aspirations and establish a kind of a shared visions. Now think about when it comes to the um, um, stakeholders, it's not only the community leaders, also you need to consider other players like government and then the suppliers. For example, when you're in your community driven project, probably you may need various suppliers who are willing to supply these equipment and the other services. So you need to take into account all these key players as well, right? So gaining early agreement on goals and plans uh, will facilitate by involving the various stakeholders at initial state, okay? And also identifying the potential conflicts or concerns among stakeholders at an early stage, probably facilitating by analyzing the stakeholder, right? So we can address their conflicts, their issues, establish some kind of strategies to mitigate all these conflicts to ensure the smoother project implementation. And also um, by uh, comprehensive stakeholder analysis, project managers can actually participate how in these projects and see how different groups might react to the project's development and enabling them to tailor the communication and engagement strategies accordingly, right? So for example, the elders or the community leaders, right, or cultural custodians, so there are communication strategies that we adapt to translate our project vision, and the criteria are quite different to how we communicate our vision and our project goals to our other stakeholders like suppliers and the government organizations, right? So we can actually adjust our kind of strategies, communication strategy, how we um, um, I mean translate and communicate the project related information to various parties according by analyzing that. So that's another important thing. Um, so um, so that's what we need to identify that, right? Why we need to identify the stakeholders, so that these particular slides actually give what I have explained before, right? So the next question is how we conduct the stakeholder analysis. That's the next important question. So there are various steps that we need to go through, right? Now, first step is we need to identify the stakeholders, right? Your stakeholders, right? So stakeholder identification is, I would say, is a very crucial. It's a very crucial primary step in the development and implementation of any project, including your indigenous community project, right? So by understanding and involving the key stakeholders, so these projects can be better tailored to the needs and the aspirations of the that particular community, right? um, so the first thing that we need to find out is individuals and families who utilizing these services that you are trying to implement, right? So indigenous community projects are basically centered around and improving the lives of the community members, basically the families. These are the smallest unit in any community. So these individuals and families are at the heart of the project's impact. So you need to actually consider the families or the smallest unit in the society or that particular community first, right? So identifying their needs, their preferences, and the challenges will help to create a kind of a services that are culturally sensitive and responsive, right? And also we need to consider community agencies for their support and awareness as well by collaborating with community agencies such as health centers or educational institutions and social services are kind of very essential for holistic development, right? So these agencies actually not only provide the necessary services but also kind of raise the awareness about the project goals and the benefits. And also it's very particularly important to identify the community elders and the decision makers, right? So community elders are kind of, as mentioned before in my past lectures, they hold a kind of immense wisdom and cultural knowledge. So they play a kind of a pivotal, very vital role in making strategic decisions that align with the community's value, right? So involving them actually ensures that cultural authenticity and community ownership of that particular project, because their saying is much appreciated and much taken by the community itself, right? So the community elders and decision makers actually make a fundamental contribution to the project success. And also we need to consider other relevant stakeholders like local council, governments and not-for-profit organizations. So these local government bodies and not-for-profit organizations often have resources and expertise that can be implement the project's objectives, right? And also, as mentioned before, corporations and suppliers can contribute through sponsorship or providing necessary resources or partnering with your projects, and also fostering kind of sustainable development in that particular region, right? So all these are also a kind of stakeholders in your particular projects, right? So what are the tools for stakeholder identifications that we can use? So there are several tools can aid in identifying stakeholders more effectively, um, um, specifically those who are not going to the field itself, like people who are doing the projects like you in the classroom environment, right? So you can do a media or internet search. So when we conduct the research to identify local news article, reports or community website that mention the relevant stakeholders, this can actually provide the valuable insight into existing partnerships and community involvement, and how will that particular community behave, or how will that particular community actually appreciate or pause for certain things. So there are a lot of media or internet resources are there regarding different communities and how they project. So these resources, actually articles and reports and all these websites provide a necessary information um, for to identify the relevant stakeholder, how they behave, etc. And also we can we can visit the site, physically visit the site, the community, and engage in a face-to-face conversation. And also it will help to uncover the stakeholders not readily apparent online methods, okay? And it also kind of foster kind of a deeper understanding of and needs as well. Now specifically when you go to the second year capstone projects, you probably will not only um, collect these information from the media or internet, but also you will actually going to visit on sites, right? But in this particular project you are that currently you are doing, you are not going to visit the site, but please do remember, physical visit actually will give of facilitate kind of a very fruitful conversation that help to unpack their their needs and aspiration and what kind of thinking these particular community members have. And also we can go through some sort of interviews, conduct interviews with the community members or elders and agency representatives and other individuals to gather first-hand information about their roles, interests and expectation actually plays a very vital detail, right? Because interviews will enable the personalized understanding of stakeholders' perspectives as well. So that is the step number one. And then the second step, once we identify these stakeholders, we need to actually group them and prioritize the stakeholders, right? So the step two, actually, this particular step is focusing on the grouping and prioritization. What do you mean by this? This is a very crucial step, which involves identifying and categorizing the stakeholders based on kind of using a stakeholder map. Right now, this is this particular slide. Actually, it draws from the Dr. Mike Clayton's Influence Agenda book. So this is the process he has introduced that as a kind of a pivotal, as a kind of enabler, us to effectively manage and engage with the various stakeholders, which is particularly vital when dealing with the projects within the unique context, such as in the indigenous communities, right? So by classifying the stakeholders, we can get a kind of a comprehensive understanding their influence, their interests, and potential contribution to the project success. So Dr. Mike Clayton actually provide a kind of a this structured approach to stakeholder analysis. So this particular model emphasize the significance of power and the interest of the stakeholder relationship. So you can see in this vertical axis, it shows you the power from high to low, and then the next and this horizontal axis, it shows their stakeholders interest from the low to high. So the stakeholders are classified into four categories based on their power and their interest levels. Okay. So in this corner, in the top right hand corner, we have high power, high interest stakeholders. So they engage extensively with the. So we need to engage extensively with these stakeholders as they can significantly impact your project and highly interested in its outcome. So typically these stakeholders can include, as mentioned before, the community leaders or elders and influential local organizations or even the local government in that particular region, right? And then we have high power um, um, high power low interest region or low interest stakeholders, right? So we need to keep these stakeholders informed as their influence is substantial, but their interest in the project is probably limited, right? For example, it might be regulatory bodies or government agencies, right? So we need to consider them as well. And then we have low power and high interest stakeholders in top left hand lower left hand corner. It's here. So these stakeholders require kind of a close engagement and involvement. Even though their power may be limited, they often we can say include project beneficiaries or community members or the local support organizations, etc., etc. So we need to consult them. And then the this end, the low power low interest people are kind of monitor. We need to monitor these stakeholders to ensure their concerns aren't being overlooked, but they may not require kind of an extensive resources or attention. So this category might encompass, say, general community members who are not directly affected by your project, right? So by using this kind of model, applying this model within the framework of in a community project like yours, it kind of we can get a kind of a deep understanding of cultural social and historical context, right? And also it is essential to approach the stakeholder engagement with cultural sensitivity as mentioned, and also the respect and collaborative spirit, um, and especially indigenous community leaders, elders and traditional knowledge holders often hold a kind of significant influence, demanding a careful and culturally appropriate approach in your project, right? So effectively prioritizing stakeholders actually allows us to allocate resources, time and effort more effectively or efficiently, I would say, by identifying those with the most influence or interest. We can tailor our engagement strategies or address their concerns and ensure the project's success within that particular community. Right, so that is the step two, grouping and prioritizing the stakeholder. And then we come to the step three, right? So the step three is understand the stakeholders, right? So stakeholders, as mentioned before, are the individuals, it can be groups or organizations who hold a kind of a vested interest or are impacted by the outcomes of your project. So the step three actually focusing on gaining much more insight into their motivations, their interest, and their dynamics of these or stakeholders, right? So we need to actually find out their motivations and interests, right? So to effectively engage with the stakeholders, as mentioned before, it's crucial to identify their motivations and interests, right? So this involves kind of delving into the drivers or uh, how they support or oppose the project, right? For an indigenous community projects, this might include kind of factors like cultural preservation or socio-economic improvements, land rights or environmental sustainability, etc., etc., etc. Understanding these underlying factors actually enhance the project's alignment with the stakeholders' value. And then also we need to find out who influence their opinions. So identifying the key influences with the stakeholder groups also help in mapping out the network of relationship, right? So in your context, as mentioned before, it can include the community elders, respected leaders or local organizations or even representatives in the local area. So recognizing these influences allows us to tailor the communication strategies that resonate with the values of that particular community. Um, and also stakeholder relationships can significantly impact the project outcome. So determining the strength of the relationships between stakeholders help to anticipate potential alliances or conflicts or collaboration opportunities. So in the specifically in indigenous community projects, recognizing interrelationships within the community and with the external organizations can actually guide an effective engagement with different parties to the project, right? And also by categorizing stakeholders as allies or opponents or neutrals in the relation to the project goals enables us to enables us to tailor a targeted approach to their engagement, right? So in your indigenous context projects, this assessment may require kind of a sensitivity to historical and cultural factors that influence the stakeholders' positions. So identifying potential conflicts early on help to develop to mitigate these strategies. And again, we can use various tools to understand these stakeholders like media or internet search. By using these media, an online platform can provide a valuable information about stakeholder opinions, their concerns and their affiliations. So specifically the communities often use social media platforms to express their views. So however, it is important to verify the credibility of these sources and cross-reference information to ensure the accuracy as well. And also we can do a in-depth detailed interviews with key stakeholders to allow for the deep understanding of their perspectives. This particularly offers a kind of a chance to listen to the community members, elders, and respecting their oral traditions and valuing their insights. So these interviews should be conducted with the conducted with the cultural sensitivity and a willingness to learn from their experience as well. So it's very important. And then what we can do, once we do this sort of analysis, we can construct these kind of tables, right? We can list all the stakeholders, and then we can give a kind of a score on a scale 1 to 5, with 5 being the most influential and 1 being the least influential, etc., etc. And then we can see whether they are actually allies, or they are whether they are helpful, or they may oppose our project or stay neutral, right? So we can actually list like this, and then we can actually see kind of what they will bring to the table, right? Or any public relations or referrals or any donations or any particular key information to the projects, right? So we can list those things in a column like this. And how might we involve them, and what are the strategies we can use to involve them, can be listed in a separate column, for example by referrals or participation in special events, etc., etc. And so this will require kind of a brainstorming of your project team members as well, to get a comprehensive understanding. So having this sort of a kind of a matrix, or I would say kind of a table created for the whole project, will give you a valuable insight and strategies to move forward with your project. Um, so the next step, once we actually have analyzed all these information and tabulate it, the next step is develop communication strategies. Developing effective communication strategies is, as mentioned before, is a very crucial for ensuring the successful project outcome. Uh, this particular step actually focuses on kind of gaining support and buy-in from all the stakeholders involved in your project, right? So the communication strategies facilitate the um, transparent dissemination of information, alignment of the project objectives, and participation of community members, and which actually ensures the project's overall success, right? As mentioned before, uh, um, so it will actually will give you an kind of ability to win the buy-in from all the stakeholders, right? So stakeholders, as mentioned before, it's a kind of a encompass a kind of a broad range of individuals and groups, including community members, leaders, government agencies, local organizations, and other interested parties. So establishing a clear and open lines of communication with each stakeholder group is vital for building the trust and understanding. So tailoring the communication methods to suit these diverse audience will taking kind of cultural sensitivities into the account as well. And then we can use the evidence-based process of documentation to all these communications. As you can see here, we can actually document the project rationale, goals, and anticipated benefits in a various ways, to convey its importance to the stakeholders. We can utilize research finding or data case studies to support the project objectives. So clearly outlining the positive impact of the project is actually expected to have the indigenous community and its members. So we need to actually have a very better evidence-based process for documentation. And then the design ideas and the concepts, we can actually present these design ideas and the concept visually to make them more accessible and relatable to those stakeholders, where we can use the kind of visual aids such as sketches or diagrams or mock-ups or like that to convey the project visions, like here you can see here, and highlight and also it will actually we can highlight how the project aligns with the indigenous cultural values and aspiration in this way. um, and also selection criteria, so that means clearly define the criteria used for selecting design options and approaches are very important. So we have to emphasize how the chosen strategies prioritize the needs and aspirations of the indigenous community, right? And also we have to engage the stakeholders in the decision making processes in the selection criteria to ensure the inclusivity and shared ownership as well. And then finally we can implement it. We can outline the kind of phase approach to the project implementation, highlighting a key milestone and the timelines. We can address the potential challenges and risks that might arise during the implementation, and we also can stress the kind of a collaborative nature of the implementation and involving active participation of all the community members. As mentioned before, you can use various tools like sketching, drawing, and prototyping. So we can use the visual tools to enable the stakeholders to better understand the design concept, and we can use the sketches and drawing to provide kind of a tangible representations of the project ideas to various stakeholders. And also sometimes we can build a prototype to allow stakeholders to interact with the physical and digital mock-up, right? If you are developing an application, of course we can develop a small prototype application for that. And also a regular reporting and updates to the written reports actually ensures the stakeholders are informed about the project progress. And we need to the reports that has to be very clear and concise, and they'll be accessible to all stakeholders regardless of their background and their expertise. Right, so that's about the last step about the communication strategies, right? So I will let you listen to a small a presentation by one of the representatives in higher education. That particular professor is explaining one of the case studies, the engineering students, how they have conducted this particular case study, and how they use the stakeholder analysis.
Mentioned before, like IDEO.org, Stanford, and all that, they use human-centered design approach when working with communities. Right. So, but UCD is more when working on interfaces. So you tend to use more of user-centered design. So to go through this cycle quickly, I just wanted this to be like a guide on how students have followed. So the first part is to understand who your stakeholders are. So that's the discovery stage. You, if you can, you go into the site, go visit the communities to see what's going on. Um, like you said before, you are not only looking for problems or needs within the community, but you also wanted to understand the strengths of the community. Is it a community that has a lot of timber, or they have a quarry where they can get stones, and maybe they have a cement production factory somewhere close to the village? You're looking at what's close to them, what can we use as part of the design that we are creating. You have a town hall meetings because you're new to this site. Sometimes there are things you will see that wouldn't make sense to you. So by talking to people, it will give you a good understanding of what's going on within the community and what they think are the needs. Because you want to be able to design from their perspective, from their needs, not what you think they need. All right. So through this first part, you are simply collecting information. And then the second part is where you're now downloading all this information. If you remember when we did literature review, I showed you something called affinity process, affinity diagram. That is the same thing that the students have used here. So you use this tool. So it's a versatile tool. You can use it for your review, but you can also use it for when you are collecting information through observation or through interviews. As long as you can write down all the different thoughts that you have. If you can read some of what they have, you see that based on all the discussions they had, they were beginning to put things in different themes or shells. So there are things that had to do with the community, I believe, somewhere here, and then you have work, you have health, fun, food. So they are beginning to look at what is in this village, what makes up this village. And it's not just about downloading this information. Of course, it's good to have all this, but this is where, like, when you were looking for a learning issue, it's very similar. All right. So for some of you, you looked at the literature review to help you find it because it's a class assessment. For them, they have access to the villages, so they talk to the villages to help them understand what the needs are and what the strengths are as well. So with that, we go to a stage we call empathize. So what you're trying to do is to see it from their perspective, from their lens. And this is why this human-centered approach fits community-based projects, because you're beginning to not only gather a bunch of information that you can interpret in your own way. But when you've downloaded the learnings and you're beginning to see different themes emerging, you want to talk to them again and see how they are dealing with those. And this is where locals might take you to their farms to tell you how things are done, what the challenges are. So in this particular case study, in the farm, you see that there is this water booters here that's got the zinc. And if you look at behind this local farmer here, there is another one there. So we've visited a few communities like that that's got this type of water storage. And one of the key things they highlighted was how difficult it is to grow crops in dry seasons. Because they have limited water storage. So that became one of the needs that the students were able to identify. But beyond the needs, there are other tools you can use like empathy map or asset map. The students were able to create, this is an asset map. So what we call an asset map, you are beginning to look at what is the asset for this community from their environment, from their social dynamics, from individuals that you've kind of had interactions with in the past, however long you've been in the community. So that kind of gives you an idea of what's going on within the community. Because you want to see, if I was to bring in a design to this community, what is already a strength that they have? If I can see that, okay, a lot of them use social media, so they are good with technology and things like that. They've gone to school and they've got, they're well educated, they have good political influence, they have good access to electricity, good roads, and things like that. It makes it easier for you to then work out, okay, this type of solution will really be good for this type of community. But if you're only looking at the problems they have, you may not be able to see how the strengths in the community would have helped shape the design that you're making. So an asset map allows you to see what they have and what they don't have, and how you can bring your solution to build on the strength that the community already has, but also meet some needs that the community might like you to. So you may not be able to read this. I think I just got it from a student's report, just to give you an idea of how they did it. So they highlighted all the strengths and then the needs within the community. And then based on the needs, you can pick whichever one you like. Because if you look at it, you can see some of different needs. So if you remember when we talk about each person in the team should identify a learning issue. So this is a team of 4, and they were able to identify multiple needs and multiple strengths. And from this, they might have, if they were asked to do individual problems, they will be able to find enough problems to work on. All right. So once you've come up with all these, the next thing is now to get back to engineering, to start thinking about, okay, how do we translate all this information into a design? And this is what we call a design opportunity. All right. So remember, we started with needs identified to design opportunity. So first you identify a need. Then the next thing is, what's the opportunity here? And they see that, okay, we can improve the water collection and storage. And this was a team of about 3 civil engineering and 1 mechanical student. So, of course, naturally, your mind will go towards a more civil type of project. All right. So that was what they identified. And from there, they went to what we call the learning issue in the unit. So this is where they now framed the engineering design problem. So how might we design this type of system for collecting water for these farmers? So you remember the problem is that the water storage system they have is limited. So how can we increase that capacity for these farmers? That becomes the engineering challenge for them. So with this now, you've identified specific type of system you want to design. So the next thing is now the detailing of the design. Their report has about 3 pages of design specifications where they're doing a lot of mathematical calculations on what sort of design this would be, the wall thickness and things like that, what capacity it can take, 500, 1000 and things like that. So they have pages and pages of these sort of calculations. And of course, they had about 3 different concepts, which I didn't have time to show here. But what I wanted to show you, or why I have these things here, is the systematic process that's involved here. So you don't just do 3 designs and one person in the team goes, yeah, I like that one better, and that's what you go for. You need to find a systematic way to compare your concepts. Because in your concept innovation report, I think you're supposed to identify a couple of concepts, if I remember correctly. And you have to, towards the end, you have to be able to narrow this down to the final design concept that you want to then detail, or have some kind of a detailed requirement or specification for. And these are some of the key things that they came up with, the criteria. And some of these criteria, if you go back to the strengths and needs of the community, some of these might have come up in those discussions. So sometimes some of the criteria you need from the requirements. So for you, maybe from the literature review, you already identified a couple of criteria that you can apply. And then you use those criteria to rate your concepts, whether it's 0, 1, or -1. Some might do it from 0 to 5, and you just give rating and then find the one that's got the best rating. Like this has got 7, so of course we'll choose the one that's got a better of these. So you have a systematic way for selecting your designs, not just based on whichever one I like. And this is what they come up with finally. All right. So in terms of design communication, in your reports, we're not expecting you to do a physical prototyping, at least for your next assessment, but you can provide some kind of drawing or sketches that shows what your design looks like. You can talk to your facilitators about what's acceptable. So whether it's hand-drawn sketches is acceptable in engineering. I'm not sure about IT. If you have software that can allow you to draw things, that's also acceptable. Remember, the idea of engineering drawing or drawing in general, whether you're drawing some kind of an architecture of an IT system or front end, back end, whatever the system is, you are trying to depict or communicate about your system and what the solution looks like. All right. So the idea of all this is to be able to communicate with your stakeholders to show them this is what we are thinking and this is how it looks like in practice. And then with that, you communicate your design to your stakeholders. All right. So once you're able to produce prototypes, you want to keep them informed of what's going on. You want that early buy-in. You want to keep them motivated about the project. So when you've done your um, whether it's a model, CAD model, or physical model of the design, you want to showcase it to them. You want to get them excited about what you're working on. So that's how the process goes. And if you look at that process from the beginning, you engage your stakeholders. And throughout the process, your stakeholder is still involved, both in the communication of it, but also even in the specifications. Because if you're in community or if you're working closely with a client, you come up with that sort of design criteria and you're doing your analysis of the design criteria. In the end, if you're working closely with a client, you're not the one to make the choice which of the designs to go for. Your analysis, your systematic selection only shows that, okay, one design has a 2, the other has 7, the other has 0. You go to your client and say, this is what we have done. And we've performed our analysis, and this is what the results are showing. Your client might look at the 7 and go, yeah, the 7 looks like the best, but I don't have the funding for it. I'll go for the 2. That is how it happens in the real world. All right. So, but of course, for a class project, you can make the choice based on which one is the best. For a class project, funding is not a problem. So, of course, it might be good for you to justify the cost of your design. But overall, if you were to adapt what we've talked about in a classroom project, number one, you don't have access to community. So a lot of your information will be on literature review to help with the technical bit, but also media articles and talking to people that might have a knowledge about those communities to help fill in gaps in knowledge that you don't have. And if there are gaps that you couldn't fill, you make assumptions. You can talk to your facilitators about assumptions just to make sure that you're not making a wide assumption. All right, that's not reasonable. Just talk to others and try to brainstorm it and work out, okay, is this a reasonable assumption for this type of project? Because you want to get authenticity. You don't want to design a project that costs, say, 50 billion for an Aboriginal community of 500 people. It doesn't make economic sense, and it wouldn't fly in so many quarters. So you want to keep it real. You want to make sure that whatever you're designing is something that is affordable in the real world. And then follow a systematic process like what I've shown you. For your particular design, it could be, or depending on what your background is, you might be used to Agile method or Scrum or other types of design processes that people use in your field of endeavor. So it would be good to follow a systematic process just to show that you have rigor in the different processes or different stages of your project. So there are tools to help you. A lot of the tools I've mentioned, of course, we didn't go deep because it's just a 1 hour class. We didn't go into detail on how to perform an affinity diagram or empathy map or the asset mapping. But these are things you can easily find a 10 minutes video, 5 minutes video on YouTube to help you understand how to use those tools. So my goal today was to mention them. And if you're interested, you can go on YouTube, learn a little bit more about them, and maybe use them in your reports, because I believe your facilitators would be impressed if you can apply some of these design tools in your work. Remember, the end goal is you want to produce a community-centered solution. You want to produce a solution that fits within that community. Unfortunately, for this semester, we're not going into the community. But at Swinburne, this is most of you are in your first year. You will have a lot of opportunities either to go for industry tour or to do your placements and things like that. And you will be able to, or even for your capstone projects or your second year, third year projects, you will be able to work with clients and you will be able to work with communities in some certain projects, and you will have the opportunity to practice some of the things we've talked about today. But for this semester, this is just preparing you and opening your eyes to what the processes look like. And hopefully in the future, you'll be able to apply these skills. All right. So I think this is where we will end the presentations. If you are interested in all these, any type of community-based design ideas, you can go to EWB Australia website. They have a lot of case studies on different work they've done before, but I think IDEO.org has got a lot more because they work across all parts of the world: South America, Africa, Asia, even some projects in Europe. So you can go through and see different varieties. For their one, it covers a lot of disciplines. So not just engineering, IT, social type of projects, psychological type of projects. You can see a broader range of community-based work that's been done there. All right. Thank you very much. Any questions?